Our next speaker has traveled a long way to be here with us from New Zealand. He's Dr. Jan Kupec, who's technical director at Oricon, a group of global engineering company. Jan is one of the most experienced geotechnical engineers in Australasia, which is actually a word, and has been working on behalf of the New Zealand government to oversee demolition activities related to the earthquakes in Christchurch. Jan's topic today is earthquake areas and high-risk demolition sites. Please welcome Jan to the stage.
Thanks very much. Good luck. Thank you. I'm just going to grab this one. I'm going to row a bit about. I have the rowing mic. Thanks very much, and also for the invitation. It was indeed quite a way to exchange over here, and it's both, so far it's been quite exciting. Today I'll show you a completely different side of demolitions, and especially demolitions of earthquake damaged structures. They have the challenge that sometimes it's even quite difficult to get people, plant, and materials anywhere near them. And the topic I'm going to be focusing today is about the structures that actually have been sitting on cliff edges. Okay, and let me just first go with you what happened in Christchurch 6 years ago and where we are right now currently. So if we're just going to go, that's a remote controlled machine plucking a residential structure that's about $4 or $5 million US. So we have expensive buildings in Christchurch, and that structure used to stand on this area, and essentially the cliff over here retreated away, which is a fancy word for saying it fell away during the earthquake in about 25 feet over 2 earthquake events. Okay, so quite a lot of things. Right, there we go. If you don't know where Christchurch is, so that's the place we call Middle Earth. That's where the hobbits usually run around. Christchurch is down here, and we can find ourselves at the bottom right of Australia, but not quite nearby. The nearest island is still 4 hours with a jet plane, so far away. What happens to Christchurch? You heard about the Ring of Fire, which has nothing to do with the Indian curry, but more with the tectonic zone that goes all around the world. So, and we have to think that we're actually at the bottom of the start of it. So it goes from here, straight in the middle of the South Island, and then continues all the way around the world, and ends up again in Chile, okay? And Christchurch is seismic, but we always believe that it's actually not that seismic. So if I'm looking actually what happened, Christchurch had a really unique earthquake experience. We had something that we call an intraplate earthquake, an earthquake that actually happens away from the main subduction zone, where actually the plates riding on top of each other. And unique because the CBD of Christchurch is roughly where my arrow is, and that's where I live. And if you actually look at each single point actually represent one earthquake. An epicenter. So we had over 12,000 aftershocks, earthquakes larger than magnitude 3 over the last 6 years. So if you live in Christchurch, you can always claim there was an aftershock near my house. Okay. On personal front, if I'm looking at it, I lost 2 houses. We lost one in the first. We moved to our second house, and we lost that one as well. Then I lost a car because the retaining wall collapsed. And I still have, for some God reasons, some possessions from my mother-in-law. But generally speaking, from the insurance industry, we're the 2nd, 4th, and 6th costliest earthquake in the world, okay? And that's one earthquake sequence. Looking at the peak ground acceleration, why has so much damage occurred, okay? The issue is that if you actually look how much things shake, that's a peak ground acceleration, we are amongst the 4 top in the world. So our earthquake shaking is actually very, very severe. Most buildings in California are designed to about 30% of the gravity acceleration sideways. Christchurch experienced more than twice the gravity, or 200% of seismic acceleration. What actually happened is the earthquake was quite severe, And the other thing what we actually have is Christchurch is relatively flat, and then we have something called the Port Hills, which is an old volcano with large finger-like ridges. And these ridges got accelerated, and very similar to a web. The acceleration over here actually increased dramatically. If you're looking at acceleration, we're looking at somewhere in the order of twice gravity, which means that up and sideways, you're being actually shot out. We had rocks, the size was essentially small SUVs, coming down. Yes, so the latest aftershock we had was on Valentine's Day this year. That was a magnitude 5.5 aftershock, and the gentleman and the lady sitting next to you managing one of my sites. And in that aftershock, we had a landslide that moved up a significant distance for us. The site where we established is underneath a large cliff, so material came down, and hardly a month goes by without a significant aftershock. The question probably is, how long does usually aftershock sequence last? So if you go to Nepal, they had the aftershock, so the main shock in 2015. We're expecting that about 12 to 18 months, and it will be back to the normal background activity. Because Christchurch is quite different, our normal background activity is established in about 2 to 5 decades, so 20 to 50 years. So if you come to Christchurch and visit us, you can expect a decent aftershock, which completely drives not just the demolition activities, but it also drives the rebuilding activities. Because you need to design a building that you expect to actually be hit by a strong earthquake. Coming on demolition activities, all our demolition activities actually include the possibility of a strong aftershock. And that's a challenge. We were at the peak ground acceleration. So you can see over here that we held the absolute record of the largest peak ground acceleration ever measured in Christchurch after the 22nd of February earthquake. And we held it for a grand total of 3 weeks, then Japan took over. Okay? I still maintain that 2.2 measured in February is a fluke, because when I talked to the manufacturer of the sensor, they only told me the sensor measures to 2.2 G. All right? Now, the other thing which we discussed today in the intermission was why so many houses were damaged. It was partly due to the shaking damage. We lost out of a portfolio of about 380,000 buildings, 150,000 of those, just simply the shaking. But then disproportional damage was also caused by the liquefaction damage. Simply the ground lost its capability to actually support the building broke apart. Now, it's not just a residential. This is a picture of the Pine Gold Guinness building. I'm also working in New Zealand as an urban search and rescue engineer and a specialist, and that was a building I was actually in from the very beginning. We had the typical large commercial structures that actually were affected, and we had some historic parts of town where the strong acceleration just peeled off the fronts of the buildings and dropped them in buses. And naturally, buildings like in the bottom left were never designed to actually take any large accelerations as we experienced. And the whole damage after February earthquake actually caused the first ever declaration of national emergency in New Zealand, which again mobilized the army. Now, if you're from a country that's not too friendly towards New Zealand, you will see 1/20th of our mobile defense systems employed in the top right corner. Okay? In the rush to get out of the base, they forgot the key to the armory. So it was a complete show. We had no bullets at all. This is a good picture, if you can see it, because that actually showed about the liquefaction. So while it's coming back, what you can see are blobs of yellow that shows the areas that actually have liquefied on a background of slightly white, which is a larger Christchurch areas where about 300,000 buildings are there. And I'm going to soon switch between two pictures, so you will see what it looked after the September earthquake. If you actually have a look at the slides, you will see a red rectangle. That's about the size of Hagley Park. And Hagley Park is about twice the size of Central Park in New York. So the yellow blobs are actually the damage of land from liquefaction, lateral spreading after the September earthquake. This is the damage after the February earthquake. So pretty much 70% of our entire living area in Christchurch was actually damaged. Question of liquefaction, lateral spreading, you can see over here, that's what it looks like when the sand boils out of the ground or the material laterally spreads. That's what you actually get. Some streets getting completely impassable. Sinkholes forming, so if you drive into it, your car essentially starts to bob up and float, and as I mentioned, when the water drains away, you actually find yourself something that looks more like cement grout rather than actually sand. I have a same slide, just a different representation. So this is from the insurance, and if you can see the yellow, red and black blobs show buildings that have been damaged by the earthquake. So that's a 7.1 earthquake that was in September. This is the damage to buildings after the February earthquake. And in orange you can see the fault line that actually was through essentially the middle of town. All right. So it was a smaller magnitude, but a high energetic event for Christchurch. It was a, strike into the middle center. Now, New Zealand prepares for natural disasters, but the natural disasters, as you can see in the numbers over there, was completely unprecedented. We did not expect a natural disaster affecting our second largest town in New Zealand and essentially critically damaging infrastructure. So the Crown, which is the New Zealand central government, established an organization called SERA, which is the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority. And they were essentially looking at various aspects of recovery. So it was not disaster management, it was a recovery. And it was about the social, economic, built environment, but it was all focused around the community. Now, what we are known for more internationally is actually taking large material and plant and actually starting to do the demolition of pretty much the entire CBD. I focus today outside the central business district on more these situations where we had about 800 sites outside the CBD that were actually affected by the strong seismic shaking. And again, I'm referring to the same spot, so you will see the same site from different angles. So this picture was taken after the June earthquake, and just for comparison, the bottom bits are 40-foot shipping containers. The cliff itself is about 80 meters high or 250 feet, okay? And in both events, where the house is slightly drooping over the cliff edge, lost in February 25 meters, which is about 70 meters of cliff edge, and in June, it lost about half of that. And the land afterwards was severely cracked and damaged. So this is typical representation what actually cliff collapse does look like. So this darker brown area just simply falls off. So you can see over here, seismic shaking literally kicks it off. It inundates the area at the bottom, but the problem is it cracks the land at the back. Now for a demolition, it's actually quite important if you have remnant structures or buildings nearby to actually access this ground. This ground can fall away at any given time without actually any aftershock. Large rain events, or just simply it can fall off. And it didn't happen on one side, the ones I showed you. We had major cliffs all along the coastline. It happened on over 600 sites that are very similar to those ones shown. You can see on the right-hand side, the road goes to the middle of nowhere. But again, in here, it's not just a little turnaround. There was an entire car park out here for about 10 cars. When you have smaller cliffs, bluffs, then rocks dislodged from them and just started to tumble down. And we observed something which is called gravity sorting, or as we call it, the biggest stuff goes furthest. What does it look like? So there's a substantial house. You can see if you stand up, you can see a little hole in the wall, in the roof. You can go any closer to it and you will see a 15-ton spherical boulder sitting in there. And I say, oh, that's not bad. There's only one of them. And you go around, you find more of them. The picture on the right-hand side over here, it's the boulder in our neighbor's house. That's the boulder in our bathroom. And I recovered this footstool. I still have that one. And every single dot is a boulder of similar size, which you have seen. There's about 15,000 of them. Okay, I'm not focusing on this part. There's a different presentation, but just could be a bit context what damage actually occurred. The other thing that we observed, and that's in the context, due to the simple shaking, the land cracks and just sloshes about. Okay. Again, this is a picture of the same site. So in here, you can see there's a ground crack and this entire mass of soil with the houses and everything on it shunted about a meter down the hill. Critically damaged all the infrastructure that's in it, and pretty much seismically shook the entire house in such a way that most of these houses weren't able to be accessed at all. Most of them were dirty demolitions. Now, as a government, my job given to me after a lunch, they said, would you like to work for us? I said, to do what? Give us for 3 weeks hand, just to tell us how bad it is and how we fix it. I'm still in the gainful employment of the central government 6 years on. All right? So either I can't explain things or problems were slightly bigger. All right? So I shall demonstrate what we have done. So we had a look at a typical area, like over here, where we had land damaged. This is the same photo just up above. And we had a look what risk there actually is of anybody being hit and fatally injured when operating in these colored areas. Both in areas where material like in here could fall off away from the cliff edge, or if you stand down at the bottom, it could be hit by debris falling from above. And that translated that the government made a relatively generous offer to property owners that actually are in this area. We essentially offered to buy the full government valuation of these properties. So the government came to you and just said, like, I would like to buy your house and land, and we take care of the demolition. So doing that on a wider scale, so this is essentially all the red zone, all the areas in red are the ones where government made the purchase offer. In this presentation, I'm focusing on this little area over here, the little blob. So we had 8,500 properties that were acquired by the Crown, and demolition actually occurred. So we had a demolition sequence in the crushed CBD. We had a demolition on the flatlands of about 8,000 structures. The project I'm talking about is about 800 structures, and also demolition in the Port Hills. And the Crown said, right, I just need a project team around it. So they appointed Oricon, my company, as the engineering advisors. Mike over here is from RCP and representing our project managers, and they told us, look, go away, find the safest way to do these demolitions without actually harming anybody. So we went through a fairly shortlisting process as described by Tim in the previous presentation, and Protrans was one of our key partners actually in that one. There were others, and they brought to the game remote controlled excavators, you can see down in there, and their expertise in the residential areas and actually ability to go where generally on a conventional plant doesn't go. Looking right now at this particular site, I'm going to use this site right now from one. It's a site that actually contains a cliff. So the cliff is over here. It's about 300 meters long, or about 1,000 feet in this direction. And then we have this larger area over here, which had about 17 houses, and it's actually a landslide. So if you stand over here and walk slowly down, you will step over cracks. And if you count the cracks up and sum them up, it's about 9 feet or 3 meters of cracking. So the land got shunted down the hill. We went through a relatively complicated procurement process where price was not the driver. We wanted to get the best team that brings the best experience not necessarily just the best plan, but experience and the best management practices from a health and safety perspective. As the central government, that was our mission. Price was almost incidental to it, because we knew that we don't want to compete at the bottom. We also set out, once a contract was awarded, so we said we want to have a team together first with the contractor and working them collaboratively with them to actually demolish these structures. So you can see these four crosses over there. So the objective was to demolish these structures. You couldn't get to them any conventional way, okay? So we actually had to build from the bottom of the cliff a ramp up as enabling works. But then we said the enabling works could actually be used in the end to protect the main road, which you see down at the bottom, against further rockfall. This road is the only road that goes to 3 suburban communities. The main road that goes over the other hill was taken out by another landslide. So it was critically that this road remains open. Now, you then sit together, you take all the stakeholders, you take the contractor, you just talk about what's in for everybody. Now, for the central government, it's life risk. So no one gets killed, injured while doing the work. But there were other offside people over here. So you can see, if you look at the broader area where the red line is, these are neighbors. There are people that are actually living directly adjacent to the work site. And the work site will comprise, to take about 60,000 cubic meters of material that comprise the slide out and place it down at the bottom. So, you know, shunting 60,000 cubes in a residential environment is challenging at the best of times. If you actually have to do it on a relatively rapid time frame, it's even more challenging. So we looked at who do we impact on? What environmental controls do we need to put in place in order to do the work safely? In New Zealand, we have a love affair with asbestos. It's pretty much anywhere and everywhere, including retaining walls. And from the government as well, media was a key risk. I mean, in a neighboring site, the Prime Minister's sister is a directly adjacent neighbor. All right? And it awakes a kind of interest what actually happens in these areas. So we turned the whole pyramid, similar thing what Tim actually shown, but we took it upside down. So before we go to do the demolition, the physical going to site, smashing buildings, taking the debris out, which is at the bottom of the pyramid, we wanted to actually start to reduce the impact, making that stuff safer by going through a very detailed engineering process to actually ensure that what we do on site is the safest possible solution we can come up with. And this is not driven by litigation. New Zealand is a very unlitigious culture, unlike, say, Australia or the United States. So we are not necessarily afraid to stand in front of your owners. This is literally driven, so at the end, everybody goes home. We implemented naturally a relatively complex monitoring structure simply for the need that we had a large landslide on which the to-be-demolished structure sat. So I'm not going to go too much in details, an entire presentation on its own, but I just want to show you the complexity to work into the environment. Because it's a landslide and a rain event of 1 in 10 years, a relatively minor rain event could have taken it out and discharged 40 to 60,000 cubic meters onto the main road, causing fatalities. We actually looked at the weather, but not necessarily all the weather we had to predict when we could and couldn't work. We needed to prepare a daily technical report that actually goes circulated to all the key stakeholders. The key stakeholders are not necessarily the people doing the job. They are people like civil defense, emergency services, other department in the government that actually received the technical report. We had developed the things that we want to monitor and what the trigger factors are and who's actually responsible for what. So we don't actually have anything falling through the gaps. Again, relatively complicated, going from simple triggers all the way to full activation of emergencies. And we went to the emergency state with the required authorities. And the daily distribution report is actually all-inclusive. We went for the option to include all, and tell people that actually don't want to be included to opt out rather than the other way around, to remove the exclusivity. Looking back more about the site itself, so each different color represents a different hazard. All right? Now you can see, so in the area in the middle, there is a close interaction. So if you stand over here, you have several options to be killed. It's quite an exciting environment. You can go down the landslide, you can fall over the cliff edge, you can hit by a rock that's falling down, or you can slip, trip, and fall, or be run over by a digger. So it's a smorgasbord of the various things to die, all right? Challenging environment, probably one of the most challenging geotechnical environments I've ever worked with. Again, our monitoring, and a view from our monitoring station, because the problem what we always find, if you monitor too close, you could actually slide alongside with the site. So we actually had to set offside. This is a view of the site from across the river, and this, the blue dashed line is the extent of a landslide, and you can see the structures that had to be demolished. We had several hundred retaining walls on the site itself, including a fairly large one. This little one is about 5 to 7 meters high, so about 25 to 32 feet high, severely damaged as well. And direct underneath it, you can see the main road passing through. And this is more a conventional system where you have a robotic total station. Now, but essentially you can see the scutter on it. Critically over here is that as the tide came in and out, actually it gave us a scatter of graph. So the points moved up and down. It was not a clear, neat line, but essentially the tides themselves changed our data. Temperatures, fog, daylight changed our data. But we were quite clear, able to actually distinguish between the real data and, say, movement during a large aftershock. The other options which we have done, we have used a digital laser scanner. So this right now sits around the corner of it. You can see in the red circle is a shipping container with a scanner. And the scanner does nothing else but goes continuously across and scans the face. Now that's a scan picture, and you can compare two different scans. You can see where there are changes. Changes are where bits just fall off the cliff, as I said, or in some instances where we send upside crews to knock things out. So we are able to actually distinguish where changes in the cliff face happen. That's a close-up over here. It gives you the complexities. You need actually a geotechnical engineer or a whole bunch of them to actually read these data and interpret them to then say to someone, is it safe or okay to work there? Now this is a site a couple of weeks ago where you can see that we established working in the bottom of the cliff. So again, cliff about 80 meters tall. We have the entrance over here. We're starting to build a whole road that's enabling works to actually go to the back of the site. And you can see a bunch of excavators directly underneath the cliff. There's no one sitting in them, they are remote control. We shunted about 40,000 cubic meters of material under full remote control with 2 excavators. Okay? That was the fastest, safest possible way to do it. The laser scanner enabled us to actually see and position the tools in such a way that they don't get damaged. We have 2 little blocks. Block A is about 3,500 cubic meters sitting over there. And at the back of block A is a crack that's about 2 feet wide. Okay? There's no conventional way to secure them. We just have to accept they are there and monitor them very closely. Block B is about 1,500 cubic meters. So again, challenging environment. This is a video of a drone flight, and I'll show you right now what we're using drones for. We started to use them about 2013 when they just came to the market. So the drone flies collects a series of photos. We take these photos, we actually put them into an analysis program. The program grabs the photos themselves and using photogrammetry 3D model gives us a model of the site itself. We can then generate cross-sections out of those ones, and these cross-sections can be then used to determine rockfall analysis, and changing conditions on the site. As you dig at the bottom of the cliff, you're changing the site. You're removing the buttress conditions of the slide. So using the drone, we were able to actually grasp up-to-date aerial photograph and up-to-date 3D models, and about a tenth of the time what conventional system could actually do. But we also then used the model in a 3D analysis, and actually we're able to put two-dimensional rockfall parts on top of that and determine where sites actually are that are able to be accessed without little restrictions in line with the methodology, or where you actually have areas that are restricted access. Now, appreciate as the site changes, as you do earthworks, this changes. Think about your own environments when you do demolitions, be it a structure, a dam, a building, you get changing conditions, essentially daily, all right? Challenge to that one is communicating this to the people actually working on the site. For this one, we're using spherical photos. This is a video where we're taking a spherical photo, which is actually a technology taken from Google Earth, or Google Street View, actually. But you can do it with your standard Apple iPhone or your Android or your Samsung. And actually take a spherical photo. You can superimpose on top of this one as a mixed reality information that are relevant to the person doing a task. So before the person actually goes into the task and expose themselves potentially to an unsafe site, they can actually go there and have a look what the site looks like probably the hour before. These things can be done within minutes. You don't need hours, days, or months to actually prepare them. Okay? And you can overlay on top of that useful information. Fundamentally, however, nothing still beats to stand around the site, be it a remote or a manual digger, and actually discuss with the people that will do the job, the task you're actually doing. So Tim mentioned when you actually go to site and you carry your demolition manual, your safety manual, your safe work method statement manual, you end up with the paper stuck like that. It's unwieldy, no one can use it. You still need to actually break it down into manageable chunks where people that actually doing the work can do that. All right? So we're using technology to enable us to feed information to people that actually require it in a meaningful manner. Now, we use technology in a relative innovative way, and I'm just going to go a bit on this one. So on this project itself, we started using about mid-2013 drones. And at that stage, we had Canadian Discovery Channel and American Discovery Channel coming to us and actually talking to us, what the hell are you doing with the drones? At that stage, the drones were about $30,000, $40,000 each. So crashing the thing was fairly consequential. Right now, you can pick the same drone with much better capabilities down in the supermarket for $300. And it's actually impressive how much in the last 3 years the prices came down, but also how much technology has evolved with these ones. Now, we used photogrammetry and geomodeling, as I described, about April 2016, and then just had a look a bit more, what else could we do? We use virtual reality. This is essentially the glasses you can put on top of it, slide your iPhone into it, and just look around with spherical photos. We start to work with augmented reality, and right now I'll show you some example of mixed reality. It's always a problem when you actually talk about these technologies and try to put them on a two-dimensional screen. All right, you would actually need the participation of the audience, but I didn't bring that many headsets with me. But always the question is, what's next? So again, looking at the site, that is a picture taken a couple of days before I flew to the conference. So you can see we have used technology to safely remove the majority of the landslide material over here, access the site, in the process actually cutting more landslide material out, and then the last house will be demolished before this wall over here is being removed. We still have the standard issues that you have on sites as well. That wall, for example, over here has a flightless moth that only lives on that particular wall as far as we can find. So we actually have to demolish the wall individually, rock by rock, and put it into a new site somewhere over here where the little bee box can actually then happily grow in after. All right? So we still have those issues as well. So all the best technology doesn't get you anywhere. Can you hit the video play button? Thank you. But I'm going to give you another example of what you can do. Don't imagine that's a rock face. Could be a structure, could be a cooling tower, could be a chimney, could be the inside of an industrial plant. The drone flies, really quickly captures a 3D model that you can then interrogate. It's useful, but the usability stops at this point. So what we've gone, the next step, we said, look, we use it already at the restricted access area, where either stuff is too contaminated or too hazardous to access, or we actually monitor areas where we need to fly there and look at specific changes to the environment. But is it truly the end of the technology? Can we use it to a bit more to facilitate safer work? And at the moment, we've managed to convince Microsoft to give us 4 HoloLenses, which is a complete mixed reality environment. So these lenses have cameras, you put them on, and then what these 2 blokes stand there and point in the middle of a table, there's actually a virtual 3D model of the site. So these 2 engineers actually discussing at the moment the progress for the next week, the tasks ahead, pointing at the site and small model. But it's not just about pointing and rotating. They can manipulate right now the 3D-dimensional model directly inside a virtual environment. And that can flow directly into documentation. So what these 2 decide goes into documentation, goes into with the contractor to actually individual tasks. Technology allows you to document, plan, and actually visualize, and that is the key to actually have a safer demolition. In the hundreds of structures that we demolished in a very similar environment, we actually had no lost time injuries, never mind fatalities. And it is again taking mixed reality, remote controlled excavators, and working with people, working actually with the right tools. Whether it's actually a helicopter, a remote control excavator, or my daughter pretending to be an engineer or a project manager, and actually use the right tool to do the job done. Now, we are coming to about the end of the project in New Zealand, about 80% through. So the question was, what next? And the guys who sit over here were actually contacted by both USAID and the International Organization for Migration and said, look, in Nepal, we have the need to deliver training for people that actually will be doing the demolitions. But these people have never actually demolished a single building in their house. They probably never built one. So could you actually provide training to those guys in order for them to know what to do and probably actually more what not to do? Okay, a high level, more pictures. So we were there for 3 weeks, and that's a delivery of the training the trainers essentially from the armed forces. Because in many instances in Nepal, they are the ones actually going to be supervising demolitions. And that's more or less the next steps. And on that one, I want to close the presentation. You need to ask questions because they're just changing the presentations over.
Oh, okay, when this fine gentleman right here has a question.
So you said that you're still experiencing aftershocks?
Yeah.
So what is the difference between an earthquake and an aftershock?
A definition.
Yes.
So essentially what you do have, an aftershock and an earthquake do not feel any different, okay? What you need is the initial earthquake to be able to trigger aftershocks. So essentially what it is, earthquake is nothing else than 2 pieces of ground moving relative to each other. But because it's not a rigid piece, like 2 pieces of sandpaper, but more a viscoelastic material, you move, and there will be parts that move more relative to each other. And an aftershock is the equilibrium building over a long time, where bits then just reshuffle themselves a bit. So getting themselves comfortable to wait for another couple of 100 years to come again as an earthquake. So it's very little different in there. The only difference between an aftershock and earthquake is that you can predict where an earthquake, you can't predict where an earthquake will be, but you can predict when aftershock will likely be, like the area extent, because it will be somewhere where the main earthquake has hit, okay? But aftershocks are actually fairly important for us, because they're part of what could happen on a site. So the site you have seen, aftershocks could trigger these 2 blocks or other parts of that, okay? And that's critical.
Jan, thank you. Jan, looking to the future in demolition terms, have the New Zealand government changed their building codes for future construction, looking at possible return earthquakes or return events, and have they reinforced the few structures that have actually remained? What sort of impact does the demolition market in New Zealand feel that's going to make on them?
Yeah, so good question. So the people in this room from New Zealand, we made sure there are not many structures left standing. The need to actually build better was recognized by the government very early on. The first thing what we have done is actually first closed off the new build consents to be issued. All new consents have to have an engineering component to it. They always had, but there is now much more rigorous. The need for strengthening is the wrong way to say. So the seismic demand of a structure was increased significantly by over 30%. But that's not truly the driver. The driver is actually coming right now from the people who occupy these buildings. We lost our own office with everything in it. All business records, gone, dirty demolition, okay? The building we want to right now occupy, as being built at the moment, has continuity provision to it. We can access it, okay? Many other businesses all over New Zealand recognize the need to continue business. They choose where to operate from on the basis of the risk. Okay, and quite often you will see that right now a new generation of base isolated buildings are being built all over New Zealand, that the buildings that can actually continue even after a very large earthquake, essentially more or less uninterrupted. Okay, an example, a supermarket. You think a supermarket? We're building supermarkets that's actually hardened. They're hardened facilities. And you're thinking, again, supermarket? Why would you invest it in a supermarket? It's just a tin shed. Well, it's not the building itself, it's a turnover. So the supermarket owners would not want to actually have a disruption to the business. That is changing the big provisions, okay? So yes, and in demolition, the New Zealand government brought out in April this year a provision for safe design enshrined in the legislation. So you have to consider during design all the aspects of demolitions. Okay? So it should make life much easier in 50 years.
All right, thank you very much, John. We're going to move on.
Excellent.
Once again, thank you, Jan.
Thank you.